Now, on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app, O'Connor and Company.
More entertaining and easier to understand than a Bad Bunny performance. It's O'Connor and Company here on this Tuesday, 10th day of February. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to keep you company and hopefully put a smile on your face and have you better informed by the end of your session with us. Coming up at 7:05, Maryland Delegate Lauren Erickson will join us about how Maryland is falling behind on electricity and power grid solutions. Thanks, Westmore. 8:05 brings us Dr. Matthew Spalding of Hillsdale, our continuing conversation about our founding. And at 8:35, Senator Marsha Blackburn. Got a hearing on Arctic frost coming up. I believe Senator Blackburn was spied on by the FBI. Geez, you would think that there would be some kind of criminal repercussion for that. It's Larry O'Connor with Cassie Smedile. Good morning, Cassie.
Good morning, Larry.
Your oldest, if I remember right, I don't know what that voice was, but I liked it. It was very
dramatic.
Yeah.
Yes.
Your oldest is almost to the point where you have to figure out, okay, kindergarten time, right? And first grade coming up and all that jazz.
Yes.
That's exciting. Very
I
exciting.
guess so. You know, it's a lot of pressure.
It is. And you've got a lot of options. You've got the public schools, of course. You've got private schools, which a lot of people opt for. You've also got the homeschooling option around here. When I was in your place many, many years ago, and my 5-year-old was about to launch into kindergarten, just serendipitously, we decided, you know what, let's try homeschooling for kindergarten. We took a look at what the curriculum was and what she needed to learn. And she had a physical disability. My oldest child has cerebral palsy. So we're like, you know what, let's focus on that. And, well, the rest is history. For the next 8 years of her life, she was homeschooled. All of our kids were. For that chunk of time, and I think it really did build a foundation for them to be able to be pretty good students and upright citizens. It doesn't work for everyone, but it worked for us. And what we learned pretty quickly was how many alternative options you have for the basics, the fundamentals, the K through third grade, where so much is established. And, of course, literacy, learning how to read. The most effective way is probably, I don't think I'm breaking any ground here, Cassie, it's probably the most fundamental building block to a child's education and to future opportunities. You get a kid reading and reading early and comprehending and able to advance in their literacy. So much of the rest is just sort of, gonna fall into place on its own.
Yes. I remember when I worked for Congressman Sean Duffy, we had a woman, the details of what we were doing in our community, we were doing this community summit, but she said the kids who are read to by their parents have the biggest leg up in life. That's the differentiator. If you had a nighttime story routine, if you just know, if you have books in your home, that she's like, I can tell a kid who had that versus a kid who doesn't when they come into my classroom.
I would
just
add
starting right there.
I would add to that reading to your children with the intention of teaching them to read as you go. I think that's the key. That not just to entertain your kid, but to actually build in this intentional goal. Because I think every parent should teach their child to read. And I know that there are parents I've heard feedback from them saying, "Oh, we can't. It's too hard." Let me tell you something. If you can teach your kid to potty train, you can teach your kid to read. Potty training is a hell of a lot harder and takes a lot more patience and takes a lot more focus. And I'm telling you, you're more incentivized to teach a kid to potty train than to read, because the results of a child not potty training is, pretty massive, right? You got to deal with it. So you're like, all right, that's it. We're going to approach literacy in the same way. There was a time when everybody learned how to read outside of a structured school setting. When your kid can know how to read before all the other kids in kindergarten or first grade, I'm telling you, they're going to be a superstar. That leads us, there's a big old buildup here for this New York Times op-ed by Nick Kristof, of all people, applauding, celebrating, elevating the efforts of 3 deep red states, Alabama, Louisiana, and Mississippi, who in their public education programs in those 3 states are absolutely wiping the floor with the other 47 in this country when it comes to reading, math, and attendance, and graduation rates. They are killing it right now, and it's because a little over a decade ago, they reoriented their focus on literacy, and most specifically using phonics to teach kids how to read. Going back to the good old days. I don't know why we looked beyond this, right? But why we stopped looking at phonics as the way to teach kids how to read. But they started. I remember my niece. I was trying to help her with her first grade class, and she was misspelling all these words on the day, and I was trying to help her. And her mother, my sister-in-law, said, "Oh no, you're not supposed to correct her with the spelling of those words." I said, "What do you mean you're not supposed to correct this spelling?" "Oh, no. They're supposed to just try to put down the word the way they think it sounds." It was called the whole language approach, and just sort of come up with your own. And it's like, how is that helping? I don't understand how that, that doesn't teach a child exactly how the sounds of the words actually make sense for proper. But that was the approach. It made no sense. And by the way, the results prove it out right now, as states that continue to use those methods are falling behind. And Louisiana, Mississippi right now is number 1, and Louisiana is number 2 right now. And that adjusts for all demographics. It adjusts for poverty. It adjusts for race. Number 1 and number 2, Mississippi and Louisiana, in all of these measures in terms of literacy and graduation rates in math. It's astounding. And the New York Times is now taking notice.
To acknowledge it. Yeah, the Mississippi Miracle, and that they went into the phonics. And so you talk about the whole language approach. I was taught phonics, but also with a combo of whole language, because they didn't want you to not write because you were too nervous to misspell the word. So, but I think we lost the combo approach of just getting kids to just move your brain, put it down, try it out. But what I think is interesting too, and I think is what you're getting at, not only changing the approach of adding in the phonics, and they did this from the legislature. They said, we are making a concerted effort to no longer be the laughing stock of these national report cards. But they also put the onus on attendance. And the parents were subjected to jail time if they weren't making sure their kid got to school. And how they've turned around graduation rates, attendance rates, so that they could invest in these kids. Because just as I started out saying, oh, my parents read to me every night, very unfortunately, that's not the case for so many kids in America. And so that the school took this on too is interesting.
Liberals have been saying, you're not looking at black children in those states. They're being left behind, poverty, and all of these things. No, actually, the numbers don't bear that out. Nick Kristoff's article, black fourth graders in Mississippi, on average, are better readers than those in Massachusetts, which is often thought to have the best public school system in the country, one that spends twice as much per pupil. That's the other thing. They're not spending as much money in these states as the states like Massachusetts or New York or Illinois. Listen to Nick Kristoff. I wrote about Mississippi's educational success in 23. Many of my fellow liberals then scoffed at the notion of learning from a state so tainted. I love that that's just a throwaway line. Wait, show your work. Why is Mississippi tainted exactly? It doesn't matter. In New York, that's a throwaway line. Skeptics, mostly on the left, have made many critiques of the gains, including that they fade in upper grades, that the states are cheating, that this is all a temporary blip, and that any progress is simply a result of holding back weak readers. The critiques have been effectively rebutted. For starters, they can't explain the continuing gains in Mississippi or the magnitude of the gains. They like to write it off. They just say, oh, no, they're just holding other kids back. They're cooking the books. They're fixing but they can't actually explain this without some sort of conspiracy theory. All right, more on this in a moment, and why this needs to be replicated. This is what living in a constitutional republic is all about. We always hear that the states are laboratories for experiments. Okay, the experiment has proven successful, so let's replicate it everywhere. We'll get to it in 1 minute. First, though, at 6:15, phonics is how I learned to read. Phonics is how most English language speakers learned to read, right up until about, 15 years ago, I think. Phonics, where you know what each letter's sound is, what the rules for those sounds are, depending on where it's placed in the word. And if you find a new word that you've never said before, you use those rules and sound it out slowly. And that will teach you what that word is. And if you get it a little wrong, because English does have some quirky little mind games that it plays on you, you've got a parent or a teacher that says, oh, actually, in this case, this is pronounced this way. But you learn that. With whole language, children were taught to sort of memorize whole words. based on, remembering, that word is, arithmetic or whatever. That's a long one, but you know what I mean. And they just memorized it instead of actually learning the rules of phonics and the sounds that the letters make or syllables make. They were meant to use context clues and pictures and sentence guessing. It was less systematic, and it had, compared to the letter-sound relationship, and its emphasis was on reading for meaning first and mechanics later. And I understand the concept behind that, but it doesn't necessarily teach you how to read. It teaches you a way to read, but it doesn't necessarily translate. And I also don't think it gives someone a love for reading, because you're not always getting the actual meaning of what you're reading, and also you get frustrated if you don't have somebody over your shoulder to help you with certain words. Then what, right? Here's the interesting thing about Nick Kristoff's article here, where, again, he celebrates these 3 states. He does recommend that liberal blue states in the Northeast adopt whatever they're doing down there, but he doesn't actually point out what they're doing. He never mentions phonics in the entire article. It's still the third rail there with the education class.
Well, that's just too close. He's like, I've given them enough credit for my time. But it is interesting how, when you talk about this, how reading is the foundation of every subject. You can't go into science. You can't go further up in math. You can't even go further up in history and reading comprehension if all you know is a set selection of words that were given to you and that you memorize them. And I do think it's a combination factor, but abdicating phonics is where this all started. And I'm still amazed at where you talk about, you teased with the state's experiment, but this is state legislatures for good. So often when we hear about public schools, it's the woke curriculum or the books that they're putting in the library that they shouldn't, and they've kind of gotten a bad rap for being focused on the wrong things, and that's bore out in state reading scores and the national report card. And yet here is a state, really hats off now to the 3 states, but I'm thinking about Mississippi first, that they all got on the same page to say, we're going to do this. We're going to be better than this. And it was, in that case, government for good.
And they're not spending as much.
Love it. Yes.
They're not spending as much, and they're getting the results. And why I think also part of what you see down there is that the permanent political class that runs education, mostly rooted in the educators and the PhDs in education, and yes, the teachers' unions, not the teachers, not Mrs. Jones, who you love for your 3rd grader. I know she's great, but their union and the leadership of their union, and the administration class, that you look at any public school system right now, and often is the case that administrators outnumber actual educators, because they've created this glut who are looking at all these other things instead of the basics, and they have such a stranglehold on the political bureaucracy that has become public education. Take a listen to this paragraph in Nick Kristoff's summation here. We liberals need to wake up to the reality that we are being outperformed on education, opportunity, and racial equity. Supposedly our issues. As recently as 2019, blue states had better average test scores than red states after adjusting for demographics. Now, red states are mostly ahead. We used to say that education was the civil rights issue of the 21st century, and if so, we should be ashamed that by that metric, Mississippi Republicans are ahead of California Democrats. If we care about kids, we must be relentlessly empirical, and that must mean a willingness to learn from red states. I mean, I got to hand it to Kristoff that he says it out loud. It is true. Whether that's going to make an impact or not, I don't know. But it would certainly be nice for Virginia, D.C., and Maryland to read this, take it up, and actually try to move in this direction as well.
Yes, and as we started out this segment, I'm entering into that phase of life of choosing. And while we live in an area with historically really great schools, I've often thought, are we living on borrowed time? Because you're seeing the trends start to change, and do they need to start looking into these things and making these decisions, or else are we about to fall behind? And then you're just paying a lot of taxes for bad education now.
Low-income children are more likely to test proficient in reading in Mississippi or Louisiana than in California, Massachusetts, or New York. A low-income 4th grader is almost twice as likely to test proficient at math in Mississippi as in Oregon. And, of course, we already know the results in states like Maryland and in Baltimore City, where in, I believe, every high school in Baltimore City, not one student currently tests proficient in math. And yet they'll keep repeating the same things and throwing the same money after the same failing system. Take a look at these states and replicate it. That's what this country's all about. Hey, that works there. Maybe it can work here. It's 6:23.
Now, on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app, O'Connor and Company.
Well, what else are we going to do this hour? We just saw childhood illiteracy from coast to coast. Well, we'll tackle some more things. And later in the program, at 7:05, Maryland Delegate Lauren Arikan will join us on the energy policies that Democrats are instituting in Maryland. 8:05, Dr. Matthew Spalding on America's 250th, and at 8:35, Senator Marsha Blackburn on the hearing for Arctic frost. That would be the Jack Smith Spygate story. It's Larry O'Connor alongside Cassie Smedile. Good morning, Cassie.
Good morning, Larry. What a lineup.
I'll say. Well, I mean, it starts with you.
Shucks.
It's all downhill. No. The politics over the Department of Homeland Security continues to intensify, partly because Democrats are trying to put a gun to the head of Republicans on a funding showdown here with a partial shutdown of the government, specifically the Department of Homeland Security. And, of course, in exchange for agreeing to fund the Department of Homeland Security, Democrats are demanding fundamental changes in the way deportations and immigration laws are enforced, which is, listen, they want to go in and eliminate ICE and change all of the hearings from an administrative immigration judge to an actual judicial court, which has never been done before. Go ahead and propose that law, but don't do it in a hostage situation over funding the entire Department of Homeland Security. That's rather maniacal, actually. And thankfully, it looks as though Republicans aren't going along with it. We'll see where the funding fight goes, but it is interesting to see the politics of that narrative over DHS, over ICE, over deportations make its way into the mainstream media, specifically a CBS News report where they claimed that they had a huge, exclusive, a blockbuster DHS document shows that less than 14% of nearly 400,000 individuals arrested by ICE in President Trump's first year back in power had violent criminal records. All right, now think about that for a minute. 14% had violent criminal records. And you're supposed to say, what? Everybody else was just a gardener or a nanny or a busboy or the person who cleans up your room at the Marriott? And then only 14%? I thought they were going after the bad hombres. Read it again. 14% arrested by ICE had violent criminal records. Guess what doesn't fall under the category of violent criminal records? A whole lot. A whole lot of crimes don't fall under my... for instance, human smuggling is a nonviolent crime. Solicitation of a minor is a nonviolent crime. DUI, embezzlement, burglary, fraud, child pornography, drug trafficking are all nonviolent crimes. So this is CBS News trying to distort the language to fit a narrative they're trying to push through. I'm sorry, when did President Trump say, all right, we're only going to deport the people who committed what the federal government and CBS News would contribute or would categorize as a nonviolent crime? No. Criminals. I'm sorry. You're in the country illegally in the first place. You're staying in the country illegally in the first place, and you shoplift. You get deported. But that's nonviolent. I don't care. You're a criminal. You shouldn't be here. Go, right? So this kind of got blown out of the water. They tried to get traction out of it, but I got to say, DHS and specifically their spokeswoman, Tricia McLaughlin, she is so good at getting out in front of these stories and pushing back hard on this. The actual number that you should be focusing on is 70% of the illegal aliens that have been arrested have pending criminal charges or prior convictions. They have broken the law over and above just breaking our immigration laws. 70%. That's the number.
that's the number. Well, when you put it like that, Larry, that's not as good of a headline for them.
Oh, well, depends on your perspective. I think it's a damn good headline.
Well, sure. But, Barry Weiss trying to, undo what's happening over at CBS, I would say this is a fail. And I just have to say, quick shout out for Tricia McLaughlin, a friend. Love that you're shouting her out. She's
the best.
So great, so strong on this issue. I don't know when she sleeps. But the majority of Americans, I think this gets lost in the media and the left's effort to push their narrative on this, but this was the number one issue of the 2024 election.
Yep.
The American people do not want people in our country who we don't know, who do not share not just our values, but like the shared American desire to be a law-abiding citizen, to have a job that provides for your family, all of that thing. Those people that come in, they're just taking advantage of us.
Right.
And I think about this, what's happening in Minnesota. I mean, we were talking earlier this morning about how, shoveling our driveways and stuff. Like, can you imagine if you're like, oh, I just want my neighbor to be neighborly, maybe pick up my mail. In Minnesota, they will put themselves in front of ICE to protect their illegal next door neighbor.
Right.
Like, how neighborly, how Minnesota nice. But it's just wild when you think about the way that Democrats and those, I would say, the open border left in this country are contorting themselves to defend people who came here illegally and are, on top of that, doing illegal things while they're here.
Right, and then break the law. Right, even more so. They've already broken the law. And that's the thing. There's like, I agree, we should deport the violent criminals. Stop for a second. Someone comes into the country illegally. They stay in the country illegally, and then they are shoplifting. They're engaged in tax fraud. They're engaged in mail fraud. They're engaged in embezzlement. They're engaged in child pornography and solicitation. And you want to keep them here? You want to keep them? You want to pay for them in our jails and prisons instead of sending them back to Guatemala or wherever they came from? What is wrong with you? We have the moral high ground on this story, and we should not let it go. Coming up, we've got a perfect example of somebody that DHS has busted and a sex trafficker that has been caught up in DHS's sting operations. They said they were going to protect children, and they seem to be doing just that. We'll tell you that story. And I want you to hear from Jason Rantz, fellow talk radio host up in Seattle. He was on CNN last night as they tried to throw this stat at him about, only 14% have committed violent crimes. Okay, you'll hear what Jason said about that in a moment. It's 6:44. The Seattle-based radio talk show host Jason Rantz was on CNN last night, and they were talking about the CBS News article about nonviolent illegal aliens. Charles Blow, I believe Chris Plant refers to him as the aptly named Charles Blow, from the New York Times tried to make hay with this. You see, you're not going after the worst of the worst. Only 14% were violent criminals. Here's Jason's reply.
Blake and Riley's killer was not a criminal prior to the murder. I think that's part of the point here.
So you want to point out one.
I think you have people who are unvetted.
Individuals.
I think you have people. Yes, of course. Just like you Googled some data and then you threw it out there. But that's part of the point.
I went to the Department of Homeland Security's website.
Charles, finish this thought. The point is an important one here. We have people coming in unvetted. And that is a reality that folks don't want to acknowledge on your side of this argument. If you were out there,
where's my side? Because I actually don't believe that we.
I'm sorry, but if the people were out there on the side of the Democrats right now who celebrate going after the rapists and the murderers and attack that with the same passion that they do the individual one-offs who have been mistakenly targeted, this would be a completely different conversation.
One or two one-offs that have been mistakenly targeted?
Yes, 1 or 2 one-offs. When you look at the actual percentage.
That's the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard.
Let me just address that.
Well, as usual on Abby Phillips' show, they all start talking over each other, especially when the conservative makes a point. But that is the point, isn't it? And once again, I mean, listen, we always talk about 80-20 issues. For some reason, Democrats and liberal commentators have decided that they want to be on the side of protecting people who are in this country who have broken the law, who not just our immigration laws, and who then potentially could, in fact, be a violent criminal against the likes of Blake and Riley or whomever else. If you really do value law and order, you need to enforce our laws. That's basic police work. That's what we do to keep a society safe.
And that's what we do to keep our sovereignty. If we don't have a border, come on in. Lawlessness reigns. I mean, ask Europe how that has gone for them recently. But and Jason Rantz, what a good point. Laken Riley's murderer was not a violent criminal.
That's right.
But you're okay with all of it. You're okay with taking
Right.
that chance.
He had been arrested in New York, you remember, but it wasn't a violent crime. And so then, of course, because of sanctuary policies, he was just let go and said, oh, come on back for your hearing. And guess what? He didn't. He left and went down to Georgia. And then the next thing you know, Laken Riley is murdered. Yeah.
Shocking.
You can't trust the left with policing our streets and enforcing our laws. Clearly, as we can see from this funding fight now over DHS. Okay, one other story, by the way, as they're threatening the funding for DHS, here's the kind of work DHS is doing right now. The Democrats are trying to hold up. Jenny Terre, Daily Wire has the story. A registered sex offender paid smugglers to bring a child across the border from Honduras. He was stopped from taking the young girl into his care thanks to the crackdown from the Trump administration on the sponsorship program. But this was all done under sponsorship for unaccompanied alien children. This was a little girl who was brought in from Honduras, and he was paying $5,000 to fund the journey to a coyote and a sex trafficker, a child trafficker, paid through payments from his business, Black Bear Construction, up in Alaska. He sent the funds to a phone number provided by the smugglers. This was all a sex trafficking ring of children. The child was being smuggled for despicable purposes. This guy's been arrested. That's what DHS is doing right now, and it's what they weren't doing in the previous administration. And when Democrats say we're going to hold up funding DHS because we are making political hay over Minneapolis and ICE, this is what they're allowing to continue to occur by not funding DHS. I would think that's an important issue for us to discuss.
Certainly. And that's the other piece of it, too, is not just when you get here and what happens when they're here and all the unaccounted for minors, but the journey up here. That's inhumane as well. That Democrats would be promoting that never made sense to me either. It's not, oh, you're getting on a luxury cruise liner and popping up here. And this little girl was separated from her mom, if I read that report correctly. And this is what happens. And there's big business and billions of dollars being exchanged as a result. And they're defending that. Republicans cannot fold on this issue.
No, they can't. And the Trump administration is doing exactly what they campaigned on. And one other data point here as we wrap this up quickly. Latest polls here, if you don't mind. Right now, President Trump and his deportation policy, he has the highest approval rating with Hispanic voters. 54% of Hispanic voters right now approve of the president's handling of his job. Of every demographic group in America, including whites, that is the number one demographic supporting this president's efforts. 54%, according to Rasmussen, right now approve of the president's handling of his job. You can't tell me that it's not the Hispanic community that is concerned about the mass deportations. It's the white, wealthy liberals that don't like it. It's 6:53.